All right, so if you were to try and summarize Christianity in one word, I don't think it's a controversial thing for all of you to come up with the same word, right? Boil Christianity down to one word, I bet you're all thinking of the same word. It's the word love, right? If you were to boil Christianity down to one word, it would have to be the word love. It's the defining part of Christianity. We started this last week. We told you last week in the series that Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? And without pause, he said, the greatest commandment of all is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. But then if you know what he said next, he didn't pause. He immediately said, and oh, by the way, love your neighbor as yourself. And when they asked him who my neighbor is, he said, everyone. Everyone's your neighbor. Everyone. So this is supposed to be the defining quality of Christianity. Matter of fact, he would later say this. In John 13, he said, by this everyone will know that you're my disciples, and here's that big word, if you love one another. This is what we're supposed to be known for. It's supposed to be the defining word of Christianity. It's supposed to be the defining way that we treat each other. But here's the heartbreaking thing to me, and I've talked about this one other time. What I'm so sad about is the last 2 years shattered love in ways that I never, ever thought it could happen among Christians. I never thought that I would see what I've seen. I never thought I'd live through a pandemic, truthfully, but I did, and then I never thought that I would see Christian relationships turn to what they did. Because love, for many, many people, disappeared based on your answer to any of the things in one of these three groups, right? So I know friendships and relationships that are gone from people who used to love and be close to each other because of one of these three things. And it was just heartbreaking to watch. And what's taken place in America now is this awful thing, and it's just permeated the church, so that if we put people into camps. And if you're in my camp, hey, then you're all right. And you and I, we can get along. But if you're in the other camp, then it's like I've put you in a concentration camp, and I am justified in insulting you and treating you any way I want to. And it is heartbreaking to watch. Many of you have been impacted by this too. Many of you have people that you used to be closer to a couple of years ago than you are right now. And Jesus says this has no part in anyone who says that they follow Jesus. No part in our lives. Matter of fact, I've often wanted to tell people who are mad at me. First off, I seldom talk about any of my views on any of these things, but when people do, sometimes people get mad. And I often want to say, when you're mad at me, then why don't you just treat me like Jesus says Christians are supposed to treat their enemies? Because he says, hey, here's where I want your Christianity to go, to the point where you even love your enemies. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you. Is that present in your life today? I mean, it's easy to talk about this invisible crowd that does this. I'm talking to you. Do you actually love the people that you disagree with? How about people who mistreat you or insult you or look down on you? Are you at this point, I mean, we're talking about graduate level Christianity, right? This is really intense stuff. But it's essential, and I'll show you why it's so essential. And so we're in this series that we started last week called Essentials. I said last week when I started this series, it's like we've lost sight of so much of what Christianity is about in the last couple of years. It's time to get back to what's essential. We started last week with what is essential. Number one is love God. Number one, it's what it's all about. And number two, tied right to it, is loving people. And now that's easy to do with all the people you like, right? It's like, yeah, I love all the people I like. That's not the command. The command is this: how do you love the difficult people? Because that's the command. We could do sermons forever about loving the people you like. That's not what the challenge is. The challenge is to love the people that you don't like. I want to show you how to do this. I want to ask you to open your program and take out the notes you'll find inside. Welcome to those of you who are watching, of course, online. Love that you write letters and send emails. Thank you so much for letting us know that you're watching. So if you want to go to our website at pennychurchlife.com and get the notes, you can download any of these notes for free. But let's jump right into this today. So a couple of things to talk about. First, number one, you got to understand what the challenge really is. Understand the challenge. And as Christians, I hope you'll see that there are a couple of times today we're going to talk about this. We kind of constantly are pushing back on Jesus' words. We're pushing back on them. And it's very subtle, and I'll show you what I mean by this, but we don't often do, either we don't fully understand or we just kind of reject what Jesus wants. But I want to show it very clearly to you what the challenge is today. So let me give you this example. There was a woman who married into a family, and she did not get along very well with her new mother-in-law. Matter of fact, one Christmas, the mother-in-law was going to be bringing food over for the Christmas Eve dinner, and so she called her daughter-in-law and said, do you want a seafood casserole, or do you want turkey? And she said, well, the daughter-in-law said, well, I'm pregnant, and I can't stand the smell of seafood right now. Plus, none of the other 3 kids will eat seafood. So can you please bring turkey? And she said, no problem. The next day, she called her husband and said, I'm bringing seafood casserole. And so that's what she did. She brought seafood casserole. And the pregnant mom tried the whole meal not to throw up. The kids, of course, wouldn't touch it. So her alternative to them was she brought chicken in a can, and she didn't even warm it up for the kids. So that was Christmas Eve. The next day, they said, now Christmas morning, don't open the presents till we get there. And so they were respectful, waiting for the in-laws to come over. They didn't get there till noon, which of course for the kids is like forever, eternity. They finally show up at noon. The mom is in the kitchen making lunch, and the in-laws walk in and immediately have the kids start opening presents without the mom even in the room. Okay, love one another, right? Love her. I mean, some people in our lives are challenging to love. Now, I've taught you this for years. There are only 2 kinds of people you are ever going to meet in life, right? Dysfunctional people and seriously dysfunctional. I've taught you this over and over and over again, and I've always said you are in one of those camps, right? It's not just all the other people. It's you, too. You are one of those 2. And if you don't think that you're in one of those camps, guess what camp that automatically puts you into? You are automatically in the seriously dysfunctional. That's all you got. So the consequence of understanding this is that in all of your relationships, you are always going to get hurt. And sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes they meant to hurt you, right? We all are capable of that. I am fully capable of hurting someone with my words or actions. So is everybody. And so we get hurt, and you think about all the different types of people that hurt us, the bullies in our lives, the nonstop talkers, the selfish people, the hypocrites, the needy person. You have anyone who's a professional needy person in your life? Always needy. And every time they come to you, it's with another need. It's like, exhausting. Or the Debbie Downer. You ever have someone in your life? I mean, they will get to heaven, they'll be complaining, the streets of gold are too bright, I can't see. It's like always something bad. They can complain about everything. It's exhausting, and we get hurt by all of this. And what's natural when you encounter people like this is to hate the people who hurt us. It's totally natural. Matter of fact, if you want to misquote Jesus, look at this. Matthew 5:43. Jesus said to the crowds one day, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, so if you just pulled that last sentence out, you could say, hey, here's what Jesus said. Love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, the interesting thing was those first words. He said, you have heard that it was said. Someone was telling all the people, it's okay to hate your enemy. So you think about Jesus' audience at the time, they'd all heard this. They'd heard it. You know who was teaching it? The religious leaders of the day, the rabbis. The rabbis were teaching people, it's okay to hate those who are your enemies. And so when Jesus said this to him, he's like, hey, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Everyone's like, yeah, I love that quote. My favorite verse in the Bible. It's not in the Bible. They're like, yeah, I love that. And Jesus said, I have a new rule for you. Starting today, here's what I want from now on. I want you to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And remember, these were Jews who'd been conquered by the Romans. They hated the Romans. The soldiers were literally stationed in this city, not far, maybe right next to where Jesus was when he was saying this. And he's saying, I want you to love your enemies. So that meant the conquerors, the people who had taken over their nation. It was like, what? This was so crazy to them. Matter of fact, Paul would later come along and write to the Colossian Christians, and he would say this, not only that, you must quit being angry, hateful, and evil. You must no longer say insulting or cruel things about others. That's where you got to go to. Now, we think as Christians, as long as they don't say it to others, I'm okay. Is that what he says? So it's like, you've got to let go of all of this anger and hatred in your heart, so you don't even want to say all these awful things about others. So why is Jesus so adamant about this? Well, again, every time God gives a command, there's always a reason for it. It's always out of what's best for us. And the first thing you know, if you just do any research online, is that hating destroys us. Hating destroys us. It's toxic to us. You can go look up on any medical website and find out what happens if I allow hatred into my heart. It's not controversial. We know that hating is linked to increased blood pressure, headaches, more susceptible to heart attacks and strokes. It damages your immune system. It triggers hormone releases associated with all kinds of negative, toxic, physical implications for our body. So in other words, it's just toxic to you. So Jesus is saying, don't do this. Have you ever watched somebody become bitter and hateful towards another person and watch what happens to their life? I've seen this before. I've watched people destroy their lives hating other people. You can't hate and have a good life. And because Jesus wants you to have a great life, he's never going to tell you to do this. So he says, let go of it. But there's another reason that's so important. Hating prevents me from experiencing not just God's love, but love in general. But specifically, it has a spiritual impact on our lives. I read this last week, and I really agree with this quote. A heart filled with hate will be unable to feel love. Did you ever know that? Did you know that? If you let hatred into your heart, you won't even be able to feel love, let alone experience God's love. So I agree with this quote too. You'll never love God more than you love the person you love the least. So I want you to, and we talked all about this last week, because last week was all about loving God. If you missed that message, I strongly encourage you to go back on our website and watch it, or hit pause on this one and go watch that one, because I asked a question last week, when was the last time you experienced the love of God in your life? When was the last time you felt loved by God? And I know that for many Christians, they cannot even think of the last time they felt loved by God. And what if this is the deal? When you're building this wall of hatred or anger towards another person, you are not just blocking love from people, you're blocking God's love as well. And you make that choice. What if that's why you can't feel any love from God? What if that's true, that you only love God as much as you love the person you love the least? Well, this is just critical then that we learn how to get rid of this. Now, here's the game that we play as Christians, okay? I've been doing this long enough. I know exactly how Christians react to this. You know what they do? We play word games. We play word games. What we do is, I don't really hate them. Right? What do? Well, I just dislike them intensely. I just would like never to see them again. I wouldn't mind if an earthquake opened up, but I don't hate them, right? That's what we play. We play these silly little word games. The command in the Bible from Jesus is not to not hate someone. What is the command? To love them. To love them so that his love can just pour into you. So, as a matter of fact, look at what Paul said in Romans 12:9. Don't just pretend to love others. Boy, does he know us or what? Because that's what we do. We pretend, and it's toxic. Because the life God has prepared for you, the best life for you now, is found on the other side of love. So my question to you at the beginning, who do you have on your non-love list? I don't love this person. Or maybe it's easier for you to say, who do you not like? Maybe that's the list that you need to think about. And then all of a sudden you got lots of names that pop into your mind of people you don't like at all. And what if Jesus is right? The damage that's really being done when you allow this into your life is really being done to you. We need to get rid of this. So how do we start to make a change? Because truthfully, I got people on my I don't like them list. Okay, so I need to change. So the second thing you do is you start to humanize your enemies, okay? Before you love them, you got to humanize them. This is fun to talk about. Humanize your enemies. Last year, my wife and I were shopping in Spring Green. I don't remember when it was, but I remember it was really cold. And we went to this little store on the main drag in Spring Green, and as we were walking up to the store, I'd never been inside it before, but they had a mask sign on the door. You know, masks are required. So I'm like, okay. So I pulled my mask out of my pocket and put it on, and she'd put her mask on. And I walked up and I opened the door, and there was a young mom, mid-30s probably, 2 young boys, probably 8 and 9, walking up to the door. And so, of course, I held the door open. She was not smiling, and she was not wearing a mask as she walked inside. And so the woman behind the counter doesn't own the store, simply has to enforce the rules. And so she walks in, and the woman behind the counter says, "I'm sorry, you need a mask." And so the woman said, and I'm just paraphrasing, because I wasn't really listening to this first part of it, but it's like, "No, thank you." And so she said, "Well, we have free masks here for you." And she's like, "No, thank you." And so the woman said, "Well, it's required. You know, she doesn't own it. She's just working the counter." All the poor employees in America the last couple of years who didn't make any of the rules. They simply had to enforce it because their boss said it. So she was on the receiving end of it that day. And so she's like, we can't allow you in here. It's the owner's policy. So if you want to go outside and tell me what you want, I'll bring it out to you. She was trying to accommodate in any way she could, right? And so the woman, of course, just got super mad. She turned around and saw us there. And like I said, I was looking at things. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard this statement from the woman saying, "You're all sheep." And she stormed out with her boys. And I thought, I feel really bad for her, but I don't... I was stunned. I mean, like I said, I was just shopping. I was just shopping. But that's the world we live in, right? If you're not in my camp, you're in the other camp, and I am now justified in calling you names and insulting you and treating you any way I want. That's what's happened in America, and unfortunately, I'd love to tell you that the church was protected from that, and the church embraced it. If you're not in my camp, then you are lesser than me. And I am justified in insulting you and calling you names and treating you any way I want to. And there is no part of that. Matter of fact, you want to see how bad this is? For those of you who are not in the Dodgeville area, you can't really do this, and I couldn't get a picture of it, but for those of you in the Dodgeville area, the next time you're driving to Dodgeville from Madison, when you get off at the very first Dodgeville exit, there's a big semi-trailer parked right in the field, right before the exit. Many of you have driven by it 100 times. You never even noticed it. Do you know what's on that trailer? It's a big billboard with the names of some politicians in the area. You know what I'm talking about? Some of you have driven by it 100 times. You never even noticed it. So now you're going to see it, right? And what the person did is obviously he or she completely disagrees with the politicians. And so what they did is they twisted all their names into insults. Like one of the guys' first name is Howard, and so they turned it into Coward. It's not Howard Markline, it's Coward Markline. And all of the names are turned into insults. So that's what I'm talking about. It is everywhere. It's like if I disagree with you, I am justified in insulting you in any way I want and treating you as lesser. I've dehumanized you. Do you know the surest sign that you've dehumanized a human being is you put a label on them? And I really want you to think about this list. Do you have anyone labeled any of these labels in your life? Jerk, stupid, selfish, evil, coward. You know how many people are labeled that last label right now in America on both camps, right? This one looks across at that camp and says, you're a bunch of ignorant people. And that one looks across at that camp and goes, you're a bunch of ignorant people, right? This is what we've done. We've just bought into all these dehumanizing tactics, and this is nothing new. It's just, like I said, I've never seen it penetrate the church so deeply. It's been around for thousands of years. It's been around since Jesus. Did you know that? When Jesus was here on earth, one of the things that Jesus did that was so controversial to the religious people is that he had dinner with people whose lives weren't perfect. He had dinner with people whose lives weren't perfect by the religious leader's standards. So one time he was having dinner with this group of people, and they were a mess. They were thieves, criminals. And when the religious people saw Jesus having dinner with them, they went to his disciples, and they were mad. And they said this to him. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with... And what is that word? It's this. Scum. You ever swim in a lake that had pond scum or scum on it? And what do? You scrape it off and you throw it on the beach because it is worthless. And so these weren't pond scum, these were people. So the dehumanizing has gone on forever, and you always know you've done it when you have put a label on somebody. Now, again, I know that this is an issue only for people outside the room today or watching, or we wish you were watching, right? But it's not an issue for us. So let me test that theory. Do you have anyone labeled in your life? No problem, okay. Neither of these guys is labeled in your mind? Not one? Neither of them? You don't have a label on either of these men. Yeah, we label all the time. And the label dehumanizes them. It takes their humanity away, and it justifies us treating them any way we want to treat them. Because do you have to care about what happens to pond scum's feelings? You have to care about that? No, you can step on scum, because who cares? It's scum. The dehumanizing allows us to not treat them the way Jesus commands us, which is commanded to love them. And the moment I take their humanity away, I'm justified in treating them abusively. I am justified in ignoring them. I'm justified in doing anything and saying anything I want. And Jesus says this has no part of Christianity. So we have to add their humanity back. We have to put their humanity back on top of the people that we disagree with. So use a humanizing statement. And on the back of your notes at the top, I put a whole bunch of ones that you can use. I heard a guy doing this one in this isn't original with me. I heard him talking about it, and he's like, I wonder how many of my opinions are the result of highly filtered information. And for him, that's the statement he was using all the time. It's like, yeah, it's a great question. The ones I use, and I've used for years with the people that I don't love, these are the two. When I'm praying for them, I pray and I picture this, that God created, this person is created in the image of God and deeply loved by God, and that God has a special purpose in life for this person as a unique creation of God. And sometimes to humanize the really tough ones, I say, I wonder what I would be like if I'd been raised in a home like that. Because it makes me think about their humanity, and it makes me think about my humanity if I was in that environment. Because it would be different, right? Humanize them. Put the right label on them. Loved by God, cherished by God, pursued by God, special to God. Some of you don't think this is don't understand just how powerful this is, so let me show you. Let me ask you what label comes to mind when you see this crowd. What labels come to mind when you see a crowd of people like this? White supremacists at a rally. Okay, now, I struggle with this because there's a lot of labels that I would put on these people, okay, that diminish their humanity. It's very natural, right? They are lesser than. It's ironic, isn't it? They treat everybody else as lesser based on skin color, and what do? We lessen their humanity. What would you think? How hard do you think it'd be to talk somebody out of these views? Pretty hard, do you think? Talk somebody out of it? Would you be surprised to know that there's a man, his name is Daryl Davis, who has talked more than 200 KKK members out of the KKK. 200. That's amazing, don't you think? I'm pretty sure I couldn't talk one out of them. He's talked 200. By the way, that's Daryl Davis. Are you a little more surprised now? I mean, it'd be one thing for me to try and talk him out of the KKK. He is talking them out of the KKK. How's he doing it? Incredibly. Daryl Davis is a singer, is a pianist, an R&B blues musician. And one time, the whole thing, by the way, he's written a book about this. You can read it. It's incredible, the stories this man has had. So he was playing in a bar. It was mostly whites. And afterwards, white people in the bar, and afterwards, a member of the KKK who was there, hearing him, came up to him afterwards when he was done playing and said, man, you're really good. You remind me of Jerry Lee Lewis. He said, you want to come sit at our table? And so he went down and sat down at a table in the bar with all white supremacists. Okay? Pretty amazing story. And he is really just a personal guy, apparently, and he likes to talk to people. And he said what happened then was this huge conversation about hobbies and interests in life, he said, with a little bit of white supremacy sprinkled in, right? They just couldn't help themselves. But what is incredible about his account was that he got them talking, and they started talking about things that all humans care about, our families. We all care about that. Our favorite sports teams, go Packers, right? So he started talking about these things. What toppings we like on our pizza. And all of a sudden, these white supremacists started seeing him as a human being. And as they saw more and more of his humanity, as he friended them, didn't shame them, isolate them, treat them as human scum, they willingly left behind their old way of life. Isn't that incredible? Maybe the way to transform our enemies is to turn them into friends. Maybe Jesus knew what he was talking about when he said, I want you to love even your enemies. Who do you have labeled? Isn't it time to change that label to see what God might want to do through you in their lives? And all of it comes down to this. So once you've swapped the label, you got to start there in your head. Then, number 3, and the most challenging of all, right, is you got to look for ways to be kind to them. Some of you are like, you had me up until now. Like, you actually want me to be kind to the person in life who's hurt me the most. Well, hold that thought, okay? Because I don't know about you, but I really relate more to Jesus' disciples in the stories than I do Jesus. So let me give you an example. One time, Jesus and his disciples were headed from the northern part of Israel down to the southern part where Jerusalem was, and they were going to celebrate Passover. And while they were going in the middle of Israel 2,000 years ago was this part called the part called Samaria. So you ever heard the story of the Good Samaritan? They lived in Samaria. The Samaritans and Jews had a little bit different religious beliefs, and they hated each other, hated them. So when Jesus and his disciples were traveling south, they had to go through Samaria to get to Jerusalem, and Jesus sent some of his disciples into this village to make arrangements for them to be able to stay that night. But it says in the Bible that when the Samaritans heard where Jesus and his disciples were going, they were going to Jerusalem, they were like, nope, no service. We're all full up here. You can't stay in our hotels, you can't eat our food, and they refused service. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we did this series on conflict. And I said, one of the biggest triggers of conflict is disrespect, right? When you feel disrespected, boom, the pilot light goes on. And so the pilot light went on in the disciples of Jesus. When the messenger came back and said, hey, they won't let us even stay there. Oh my goodness, it's like, what? And here's what happened. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them? We got this, Jesus, right? And if this was, if this was an American movie, the answer would be yes. It would be, can you hear the dramatic voice? They disrespected the teacher, so they burned them all, right? Isn't it amazing? I've just been so aware of this lately, how much of our TV shows and movies are all about revenge. You show me disrespect, I kill you, I kill your family, I burn your business down, I take everything you have, and then we celebrate and we're all like, yay, what a great movie! Right? We're so encultured into vengeance as a part of what we do to somebody who hurts us, somebody who offends us. We get even with them. We put them down. And Jesus hears this from his disciples, and look at his response. It is immediate. Jesus turned and rebuked them. Now, we don't know what he said. It doesn't tell us. I would love to know what he said. But that rebuke had some anger and some emotion, I'm sure. It was like, I can imagine him saying things like, do you guys even listen? Ever? Seriously, do you ever listen to me? Do you ever listen to what I'm telling you? What have I just told you guys? Because just a few chapters earlier, he literally had just said this to them. Hey, by the way, love your enemies. He had just said that to them. Can you imagine how frustrated he was? It's like, really? Raise your hand, disciples, if you think I want you to burn all your enemies. Raise your hand. Everybody, hands up. All right. No. What do I want you to do to your enemies? Love them. Let's go. On we go, right? We don't know what he said. We just know he was mad. And he's like, for goodness sakes, how many times I got to say this? Am I stuttering? Come on, really? Love them. Don't burn them. Love them. Love them. That's what he wants. Now, this is where I have made a mistake. And I'm very, very aware of the mistake I've made. Now, I wasn't aware of it until this week. The world screws up the command of Jesus. It gets so close, I should say, and I have bought into this like most of you have. Let me show you. Confucius once said, do not unto others what you would not wish done to yourself. So it sounds like the golden rule, right? You ever heard the golden rule from Jesus? It's pretty close. A famous rabbi at the time of Jesus said this, what is hateful to you, do not do to anyone else. Sounds like good advice, right? It's so close to what Jesus said, but it's not what Jesus said. Both of those are do not. You see that? Do not. What did Jesus say? Do. Is there a difference between do not and do? Is there a difference between those words? In American Christianity, and I've been a huge part of this, we have celebrated the do-nots. I wanted to let them have it, but I didn't do it. And everyone's like, ho, way to go. You're growing in your faith. Look at you. Way to go. You didn't swear at them, punch them. You didn't gossip about them. And we're all like, and hey, by the way, praise progress. That's better, right? The do not. Is that where Jesus said to leave it? Did Jesus say just do not? And I'll be happy. No. What did he say he wanted us to do to those who treat us badly? Do not? Well, certainly that, but he also said, I want you to do. Look at this again. Love your enemy. Just in case it's subtle, I wanted to make it bigger. What's the command in the Bible to those who treat us badly? Is it a do not command? It's not a do not command, it's a do. Do you get that? Do you hear the difference? Which one have you settled for in your life spiritually? Because I can't be the only one. I cannot be the only one who missed the command of Jesus, who thought that that I was doing great just because I was doing not. The command in the Bible is to do, and to even do good to those who've never done good to you. I remember the first time I really saw this when I was thinking about it. Do you guys remember Westboro Baptist Church? Anyone remember them? Don't hear a lot about them anymore. They were the ones who used to protest outside of the funerals of dead soldiers back in their early, 2010, 11, 12 time period. Remember this? They used to stand outside of the funerals holding up signs like that, thank God for dead soldiers. And they said all of this was proof of God's judgment and wrath on the nation, and they were Christians doing this. I couldn't stand how much media attention they got at the time. It's interesting now, it's been 8 years since we've really heard their name. You know what happened? Their pastor died in 2014. His name was Fred Phelps. Just a cheerful, happy young man, so you can see right here. But he was the leader of this church. And he passed away in 2014. And I will be honest, I did not handle that right. Because I was happy when he died. Because his poison went away. His church has no visibility anymore. And I was happy because I thought so much damage done in the name of Jesus. But there were Christians in the community who were way better than me. Because the next time that church got together, they stood outside where the church was with this sign. What's the command? It's not do not. It's do. Do good even to those who make your blood boil. It never honestly even dawned on me to do good. I was just happy that I didn't throw a party. I did not, and I was happy. Some of you know that this is a change that has to be made in your life spiritually, right? Do you get this? We have settled for do not, and we're happy. That's not the command. We need to start to do. So my question is, when was the last time you did something kind to someone who has been unkind to you? Can you even think of a time? Think of the person that you don't love the most, that you just dislike intensely, right? All the other words that we use for our justification for why we don't really hate them, we just can't stand them, never want to see them again, right? When was the last time you did something kind to them? Am I the only one who settled for do not when the command is to do? So here's what I want you to know leaving here today. For you to grow spiritually to the next level with Jesus, you've got to start to do. That means changing your mind about them, right? Taking the label off, pond scum, evil, awful, ignorant, stupid, selfish, all the labels, taking them off and putting the real label on them, loved by God. Pursued by God, cherished by God. You got to put the right label on them so you can treat them the right way. And then looking for opportunities to do. So what do? Do you mean, some of you have been abused. Do you have the abuser over for dinner now? Do you let them watch your children? No, you don't. There's a difference between doing good to someone and trusting them again, right? There's a difference. I can still do good to someone who has abused me in the past without ever letting them abuse me again. I'm not saying that, but look at the list again. I took this verse, I broke it down into bullet points, pick one, and I threw one extra from another place that Jesus said, okay? What can you start to do for the people that you do not like? Can you start to do good to them? Can you bless them? How about just starting to pray for somebody who hurt you? Can you do that? Can you do that? For some of you, before you ever get to that, you've got to do the last one. You've got to forgive them. And we just did a series where we talked about forgiveness. You can watch it online for free. So, I've started this in my life. There are a couple of people who have really, I don't love. And I dislike intensely. And I've started this process of doing. Because I want to be what Jesus wants me to be. Who do you need to start with? Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. And for some of you, this is really painful. You've been hurt terribly, and you have people that you can't even stand to think about without your fist clenching, your stomach tightening, your shoulders tightening. You got to think about what label you have on them, and you've got to start with your mind. You've got to start to humanize your enemies, like Jesus said. They're not scum. And if you'd have been raised in their home, in that environment, maybe you wouldn't be all that different. Start to humanize them. And just pray. Would you just pray this and say, God, is there something kind I can do for this person? Some of you, those words just choke in your throat, even thinking about saying it. Then just pray and say, God, I pray that you would repair and bring healing into that person's life. Can you pray that? Can you pray for something good in their life today? The reason we do this, like it said in the verse I quoted before the service, we forgive because we have been forgiven by a God who's given us. He gave everything for us so that I could be completely forgiven because of the death of his son, Jesus. And for some of you, maybe that's the next step, is you're not going to be able to forgive someone until you receive God's tremendous gift of forgiveness in your life. And that's available right now with your head bowed, your eyes closed. You can ask for this gift. You can say, Jesus, with the faith I have, I come to you. Please, forgive me. I've done and said unloving things in my life, and I was wrong. Please forgive me. Please come and make your home inside of me today. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish, would you all grab your little connection card out of your program? Maybe you just prayed and asked Jesus to forgive you. You can check that box, or you have a prayer request. Some of you, this is a big deal, and you need a team. We have a team of people that will pray for you. If you need help forgiving someone, why don't you just ask for the team to pray for you? Then you can just drop this card in one of the 2 offering boxes back on the back walls where you came in. Thanks so much for coming. Hope to see you again next week.